Welcome to In the Black, the podcast that shines a light on resilience, transformation, and the power of reinvention. I'm Araceli, and each week, my co-host Shannon and I sit down with incredible women who face some of life's hardest challenges, from personal setbacks to societal obstacles, and have emerged on the other side stronger, driven, and ready to make a difference.
On In the Black, we celebrate these stories of strength and success, diving deep into the journeys of women who turned pain into purpose, adversity into action, and now dedicate themselves to making the world a better place in their own way. They're here to inspire, share hard-earned wisdom, and remind us all, no matter how dark things may seem, life is cyclical and dawn is coming. So whether you're looking for inspiration, motivation, or just a reminder that change is always possible, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to In the Black.
Welcome to another powerful episode of In the Black, where we shine a light on the dark corners of life and the radiant purpose that can rise from them. Today's guest is a woman who embodies the phoenix rising from the ashes, Sharon Rolph. Sharon is not only a behavioral scientist and essence coach, but also proudly known as the Queen of Courage. After facing the uncertain shadows of retirement, a stage of life that can feel more like an ending than a new beginning, Sharon turned her fear into fuel. She transformed her own path through post-retirement ambiguity into a mission of guiding others toward purpose, passion, and possibility. Her work centers on the profound importance of essence, our authentic self, and how reconnecting with it can be the key to living your dream life, especially in the second half of it. Through her podcast, speaking, and coaching, Sharon dives deep into self-improvement, motivation, and the art of discovering purpose when society tells us we should be winding down. So, if you've ever felt lost in transition or questioned what's next after a major life change, this episode is your beacon of hope. Let's welcome Sharon Rolph and begin the journey of turning fear into fulfillment.
Welcome. We are so glad that you're here with us, Sharon. You often speak about fear after retirement. What was your own emotional experience during that transition for yourself, and how did that help shape your mission?
Well, okay, my getting over fear actually goes way back to when I was about 40 and moved from Seattle to Tampa, Florida. And I was transferring with my job. And one of my friends here in Seattle had said, in my goodbye party, words of wisdom that she shared with me. She said, give yourself 6 months before you get homesick and come back home. And at 3 months, I thought I was doing okay. But by the fourth month, I had hit a wall and I started being fearful. I only knew like 4 or 5 people that had transferred from here down there ahead of me, and I didn't see them very often. And how do you make new friends, So I got really, hitting the wall. And so for some reason, I got out my Bible concordance and did a search on courage. And come to find out in Joshua chapter 1 and 2, about 8 times it talks about do not be afraid, be of good courage, be of great courage. I will be with you. And that led me to stop my foot and say, I refuse to live my life based on fear. And it has made such a difference. But the fear in retirement kind of was around after about 3 months. I thought, oh, how do I know if I'm productive? I don't have a boss to keep happy anymore. And but a week before I retired, I had begun a coaching class. It was kind of aligned with my career that I'd had at Boeing, and I was a facilitator of problem solving, taking problem solving down to the lowest levels. And so even though I was retiring, I went ahead with the class because it was a natural progression. And the first thing they taught us was how to write our essence statement. Now, I'm teaching people how to do that now, but I've renamed it to Spark because a lot of people are using the term spark these days, and I think, I mean, essence. And so spark seems to define a little bit closer our intrinsic motivation, what makes us happy. And I love bringing out the best in people. And when we know what our intrinsic motivation is, aligning our decisions and choices going forward with our essence or spark, every day feels so much better. And I I even equate it to feeling a little bit like heaven on earth because it fits us so well, and it brings out such energy and joy and fulfillment. Don't we all want that?
I love that. Yes. What does essence truly mean to you, and how can someone begin to uncover theirs after decades of living by roles and responsibilities?
Oh yeah, that's such a great question because nobody teaches us that much about essence or spark. And I recently found that well, okay, let me give you a little story about around that, because when we finished writing our essence statement, we stood in a circle, and they wanted us to read it to each other in our class. And I had noticed that as it was coming around the circle, a couple people were, kind of sniffling, and I thought, what this that about? But when it came my turn, I couldn't believe it felt like somebody had asked me to define my soul. Wow. So yeah, it kind of choked me up too. Um, and here's what I read them. I am precious jewel of wisdom. I am colorful collaborator, motivator, and learner. I am tranquil, authentic, and pure inspirer. I light fires. And I want to light everyone's fire, because when I realized who I was on the inside, those invisible assets, your personality, your values, your hot buttons, your hopes, wishes, and dreams. Who knows that about us but us? And the things we love to do is part of that recipe too. So, the beautiful thing about your essence or spark is that you know yourself better. In fact, one of the things that just kind of amazed me about what I've learned about this process in the last 2, 3 years is when your decisions aren't aligned with your values, not aligned with your values, it creates all kinds of frustration, maybe even anger, maybe even acting out. I have a couple nephews that have had problems with anger management. Their values are not aligned, and their choices, decisions are aligned with their values. Who knew that that was such a dynamic importance in our life? And how I think about values, an easy way to kind of think about it is when you're reading a story or watching TV, the news maybe, and something happens to maybe somebody else, and oh, somebody needs to fix that and do something about that. That's kind of indicates it might be connected in some way to one of your hot buttons and a value. Or let's see, another thing would be maybe something about something needs changed, in your community. Maybe somebody got hit by a car, and how could that not have happened if it was better planned? So these connect to something that matters to you, and we all have things that we things matter to us. So I think I have creativity is a kind of a hot button for me, and beauty and integrity and love. So that's an example of values.
I love that so much. It's definitely interesting. I did a class a few years ago where they went through a list of values and you got to choose what you stood behind. And mine were freedom and creativity and authenticity. And so those were I think they had us choose like 6, but those were the ones that throughout the years I'm like, oh, this is definitely something that is extremely important to me. And so that's pretty awesome. Now, since we are talking about values, you call yourself the Queen of Courage. Is there a particular moment in your life that earned you that title?
Well, there's kind of 2, 3 steps, and I'll try to make it short. But I did some podcasting before the pandemic. And because I didn't have sponsors, and you kind of need sponsors to keep rolling, so I decided to stop. And I asked around 8, 10 people, who do you know that could be my guest on my podcast to talk about courage? I couldn't believe I had to ask so many people before somebody knew somebody that was courageous. There's a problem here. So by the time I finally found somebody, he was such a fascinating person. He was, I think, when I had him on my podcast, he was probably about 82, 84, something like that. I did have lunch with him before Thanksgiving. He's now 90. No, well, anyway, he he's still around. He's still fascinating, and he had 2 PhDs. I'm not sure what they're both are in, but I know he was a minister, but he also for 30 years was a soccer umpire. There's another term for that. Gives the rules of who's
Referee.
referee. Yeah, that's probably it. And he also was a guide on the railroad through Montana. He just has done lots of things. In fact, I don't think he says no to anything. And he's such a delightful person. And that was probably the first indication that something was missing here. And then somehow somebody found me on internet as a coach, and they were inviting some of us coaches to come on and speak. It was a class in Brazil, and they were just trying to learn English. So they said you can talk on anything you want, and this class was mostly 40 to 55-year-olds. They just wanted to hear English, I guess. And I did give them opportunity to ask me questions. And they liked my press. Oh, so I talked about retirement, and I said it probably doesn't affect you, but it affects your parents, and you can give them some tips from this class. So they actually invited me to come back again, and that time I spoke on courage to be, courage to do, and courage to have. So I had to do some research on that. So then when I was later asked to be, I was doing a class on how to make your pitch, 30 seconds or something. They said, well, what are you known for, Sharon? And I said, well, for courage, I guess. And so, okay, you're the queen of courage then, because there was another lady she was the queen of her neighborhood dog walking business or something. So it kind of started from there. And I thought, well, if somebody needs to stand up and say, I stand for something, then I'm willing to stand for courage. And I had read years ago, somebody became the vanilla queen. She promoted vanilla, and I thought, well, we can add names to our title all the time. So I mean, not all the time, but it's kind of fun to do that.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. So, what are some common myths people believe about retirement and personal value after leaving the workforce?
Well, most people, I guess, figure that they've earned a right to sleep and do whatever they want and be lazy and be golfing 24/7 or something. But I have been blessed, fortunate to, since I kicked fear out of my life, to look a lot younger than I am. I'm 77 and I brag about it. And so I don't have, or I don't wrestle with that belief that I don't matter. I don't have, most people guess that I'm about 15 years younger than I really am. So I don't feel like I've really faced that dilemma, but it's so much like what you believe about yourself is what stops you. In fact, I often say I now lead on a weekly basis a loneliness to resilience group. And I often say on there, I'm the one that stops me, decide what stops me. And yeah, there's times when maybe you have a dream or as you have time to rest and reflect and catch up on life, and get back to what your heart really wants to do. Sometimes, especially like on vacation, you're looking at the campfire burning, or you're looking at the ocean and the beaches, and a small voice talks to you, and it kind of might scare you because it probably sounds like something that touches your heart, but it's so big it scares you to death. And what I want you to do is listen to that spontaneous, quiet little voice that's talking to your heart. Because even though it may scare you, it also probably touches your heart in a pretty significant way, maybe around some of those values we mentioned. I'm looking. Oh, well, yeah, I've got a bunch of art blocks here that I've made, and here's one thing that people forget. Once you don't have a job title, you don't have a team to work with, you're not representing a company anymore, you think you're at the end of it. But in the Lion King, it comes along and says, have you forgotten who you are? You still have that education. You still, now you know so many people that you've worked with over your career. You still were maybe a dynamite debate debater in high school, and that's still you. You know, you may have been a dance queen or actor or musician. You're still that person. That part of you hasn't changed, and that's part of that invisible talents that we don't know from each other. So since I believe I'm the one that stops me, I have to believe that I can still contribute. Hey, a great way, in fact, one of my guests on my podcast, I wanted to talk to somebody about maybe starting a foundation or a nonprofit in retirement. And the guy that I had invited actually was married to somebody who came on the podcast totally by surprise. She had started a nonprofit in Uganda, I believe, and was teaching people there how to do professional kinds of jobs like travel industry, health industry, education, and giving them talents that they could actually be paid for. And her advice for doing something in retirement that actually matters to you a little bit is to volunteer. And an easy way to volunteer is if you were an accountant in your career, simply find a nonprofit or foundation to do accounting for them. And it's just an easy transfer. If you were a pilot, find a company that or nonprofit that needs things or people delivered somewhere. So until you find something that really gets a hold of your heart with meaning and purpose, volunteering. I've written a course last year on volunteering, and it turned out so good because that's another easy way to find something to do that matters to you. But there is one caution: not everybody that wants volunteers actually trains them. And if you don't get trained, keep walking, keep looking, because that is not respecting and honoring you. But like for now, right around the block from me, not even a half mile away, is a food bank. After I quit driving for Lyft to pay off a credit card, I decided, well, this is so easy and convenient, and it's still driving and still talking to people kind of somewhat. So one of the principles though that popped up from the food bank is I've told people about one of the principles about volunteering is reciprocity. When I was about 14 years old, my mom said, you know, Sharon, there somebody I guess at church wanted or needed something, and she suggested that I could help them. She says, you know, when you bless somebody else, You get blessed too. Oh, I do. Yeah. Volunteering is a way to feel good. So look for feeling good by volunteering.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. I think that that's kind of a staple in our household. And I also think that you can meet people who are so fascinating because people who do volunteer are typically people with big hearts. And I don't know, it just will change your life to volunteer. So I think that's awesome. So let's go from that and let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about the dark times. So grief, identity, loss, loneliness. You talk about them serving as a catalyst for reinvention. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah. In fact, I am kind of still going through some of that because I kind of all my life have felt like I was different. What other people struggle with. I'm different. Well, yeah, I was different to a degree, but a lot of us, many, many, many of us still have lived through trauma, through accidents, through diseases, through cancer. When I got fear out of my life, I really have not been sick at all since. I think during COVID, I had a 3-day cold. That was it. But so the trauma I lived through was as a kid. My There was sexual abuse in our home, and my older sister was the main victim. I didn't know until I had left home, maybe 15 years, that there was a baby, and they kept the secret from me. But I saw this abuse happening, and I had decided that to be safe, I need to get good grades. I need to be obedient. I need to not rock the boat and be focused. Well, I was a lifelong learner even at 4 or 5 years old because I drilled my brother and sister on their flashcards, 3 + 2 = 5. I knew them almost better than they did, and they were in first and second grade. So by the time I started first grade, um, I was ahead of everything else going on, and they let me skip second grade. I was so glad that happened. I was more mature than those people behind me. But I'm realizing more since being retired that there was that the wanting to be invisible has followed me my whole career. I felt deep in my stomach that I was invisible. And there's so many people in retirement that also feel invisible. And I did a hypnosis session here recently where I realized that wanting to be invisible meant, being my personality was tempered down. I was afraid of men. I didn't. I kind of lost my voice, and even though I've become influential, well, that was kind of through a profile that came shortly time I retired, and it called me an influencer. You got the wrong person. That's not me. That's a mistake. I'm sure it's a mistake. So I didn't know that influencer was in me because I had wanted to be safe and not rock the boat. So since I'm the one that stops me, I started taking kind of like baby steps towards maybe I was meant to be an influencer. And the door that opened for me around that was, in fact, being invited to be a podcast guest with a station in New York City. And then they invited me to do a series, my own podcast that became uh, Maximize Retirement. Not about money, but all the emotional things about retirement that also can knock us off our feet. So I think retirement, ladies, is a whole season of untapped potential. We get to live from our heart. in retirement. We're the boss. Nobody really tells us that we're the boss now. And what's in your heart to do for the world and for your community and even for your family? A lot of people, their purpose in retirement becomes the kids and grandkids. I don't have kids and grandkids, so what am I going to do? I never got married. I still have a wedding dress in my closet that I dream of wearing someday. But again, that doesn't stop me. So I think our jobs often lull us into monotony, pay the car, pay the house, pay the education, and we lose track of where we left our dreams. And that what really matters to us is part of that whole essence and spark process is to revive the what was it I wanted to do in life when I gave up to get married and have kids? And especially with other singles, I'm surprised at how many single women there are that never got married too. And all the more reason that they need a purpose to get out of bed in the morning, to get out of the house. And I think boomers can help heal the world through this pandemic. You know, I I'm kind of weird. I did write a book, Fresh Courage in Retirement: Finding Purpose, Essence, and Fulfillment. And in fact, this kind of ties to my things I love to do. I love to sew. I had collected words of wisdom over the years, and I love beauty. And I wrote this in such a way that I ask a lot of questions to help you remember what was it that I like to do, and and now I have a license to do it. It leads you to do some research on yourself, which I always enjoy doing, knowing yourself better. In fact, that's one of my bylines of doing learning a spark is you know yourself better. You're more confident, you're more in control of your time in your life, and you actually like yourself better. So I think all our dreams that have been laying dormant have a license now to be pursued. And okay, so here's an idea. If something happened that you felt what you were a failure about and you regret that, and regrets are something that kind of starts popping up in retirement, that turn that regret into a learning experience. Being curious in retirement, being a lifelong learner, and being a volunteer are three heavy, big secrets to and purpose is secrets to being having a good retirement. So,
What advice do you have for someone who feels invisible or irrelevant after retirement?
well, I remember one of the first ladies I talked to about her retirement. She had been forced out of her job that she loved, being a supervisor at a hospital emergency room. And she had gotten sick, I guess, a couple years before COVID. And so when COVID hit, they kind of encouraged her to leave, retire, because she was that age. And she was walking. I think her and her daughter had just gotten some groceries, and they were walking home. And her daughter was talking to her as if she was invisible, and it was so offensive to her just because she no longer had, a job, a title, a team. Just because she didn't have a job, she was invisible. It really hurt her. And in essence, her daughter treating her that way. So that might be your experience. It might be your thought process because I don't have a job, I don't matter. And that is not true. As long as you're breathing, you matter. And you might need help reigniting that spark, getting that energy back, and that sense of thriving and why you're here. And that's exactly why I want to help people in retirement with learning this. I've kind of known that the world didn't know this was possible to define your soul, and so I've kind of been pretty patient, waiting for the tide to turn a little bit, and that people be hungry. Talk about the Hunger Games. Not that I watched them at all, but are you hungry to know yourself better? It's possible, and so um, I. One of the stories I tell about feeling invisible was at my job, and for some reason I wasn't invited in to have audience with the top guy in our building. I worked for General Telephone, GTE, and we were all kind of expected to ask this big boss, questions. He was probably the smartest one in the room, but there was something in me that wanted to. Do you have a question for us? We might know something you don't know. And I did not have the courage to speak up. So it does take a lot of courage to um, have a voice, to have an opinion, to have something to say, and to have the confidence to speak up and share. And so, like I say, I'm the one that decides what stops me. Um, get Find something that helps increase your courage. And I have like over 170 little vignettes on Instagram on courage, and I encourage say something. It started with me holding up my little art blocks and telling you why this word of wisdom matters to me, and it they may help. Just little, thought for the day helps us all a lot, right?
Absolutely. Can you share a success story from someone you've worked with who found new purpose in their later years?
The people that I have helped, well, okay, Jeffrey, he was he was not ready for retirement, but he did want to know himself better, and in anticipation for retirement. In fact, I've been wanting to ask him, have you in fact retired now? But his reason for wanting to work with me was because he didn't know what he wanted to do in retirement. And he was probably between 50 and 55 or so at the time. And he was working in real estate. And in fact, I believe he actually specialized at that time to be working, especially with retirees when it comes to real estate and either investing or moving or downsizing. And so he found out that what was important to him in his hopes, fears, and dreams, hopes, wishes, and dreams was a history. And he had a son working at the time on the East Coast, and that had going out to spend time with his son meant he was traveling some. And he realized how much history meant to him. And so he had made a list of, as a result of our process, of 3 or 4 trips that connected with history of the United States, and I think there was 1 or 2 like Spain or Portugal or uh, Cyprus that might have really piqued his interest, and he was willing to both do research ahead. So once he did the trip, it would mean so much more to him, and that gave him such a sense of being ready and looking forward to retirement. I believe his wife also worked. I didn't get to work with her at all, but I'm sure helping him might have also bled into also him being able to help his wife make some new choices too.
Oh, I love that. What daily practices or mindset shifts can help someone rediscover inspiration and motivation?
Well, that is a good question, and something that has made quite a bit of difference for me is, when you're trying to go to sleep and you're thinking of all the things that happened that day and wished you'd said something different or missed out on doing something that you wanted to do, and that is to pray. And it's amazing. I've just recently come across how that prayer And that whole getting to sleep is a challenge for people, and that the prayer process is something that calms you and gets you to focus on either the good, well, should, it's a really good thing to be aware of what did happen in your day that you especially felt good about. That is a great way to calm your mind and be grateful for the good that happened that day. And I have 20 people or so that I pray for every day as I'm going to sleep. And oops, I fell asleep in the middle of my list. Oh, well, that's why I'm doing it, is so it does help me, calm me to go to sleep. And I do it the same thing in the morning. And the beauty about the morning is I not only think of my friends and relatives, but often in those prayers come a still small voice that encourages me what I need to do today. Don't forget to blah, blah, blah. In fact, I think I have a list here today that I made before I left my bedroom of what I want to remember to do. And in fact, a couple of the titles I put on Fresh Courage in Retirement was I came from a little voice that I was while I was watching a Hallmark movie. I call it my intuition that is alive and well and speaking to me when I'm um, calm and centered and grateful. So I think that might speak to what you're saying there.
Absolutely. And then what's one message or mantra you hope listeners carry with them after hearing your story today?
All right. So buy my book. It is on Amazon, Fresh Courage in Retirement. And the one of the things I often leave at the end of podcast is this statement from Thomas Wolfe. I saw it on the wall when I was working at GTE, and it said, if one has a talent and fails to use it, one has failed. If one has a talent and you partially uses it, they have partially failed. If one has a talent and finds somehow to use the whole of it, they have gloriously succeeded and won a satisfaction few people ever know. I think that's a good way of describing heaven on earth. You found a fulfillment and satisfaction few people ever know. So on SharonRolph.com, or you can also look at effortlessvitality.org, is my program for Discover Your Spark, Rekindle Your Joy. In fact, my little business card here kind of is example of where's your spark. We all need to be having something that lights us up and gives us energy for the day and for the rest of our years. I'm looking forward to turning 100, and I want us boomers to make a difference for healing our world, that turn this free time that and and seeing it as potential for good to come out of it. Let's get to work, boomers. It might be time, in fact, to do another Peace Corps gig. A lot of people were changed from doing Peace Corps work, and it's still possible.
I love that.
Well, the thing about that I could make a little stronger point about is when I started refusing to live my life based on fear, it gave me mental strength. Boy, do we need mental strength. And that whole um, idea of, well, in fact, I actually attended a class from the UK on how to have mental strength about the same time I was retiring, and they said that there was a whole week of an hour long uh, teaching each day, and I only got to listen to the first one because I had a conflict. But he said when you're facing something that scares you, kind of, maybe it's meeting somebody that you don't know and you don't know how the meeting's going to go, or that you are walking into a room of a meeting that you're not sure how the outcome will be. He said, first, recall to mind a warm memory and hold it for 15 seconds. And then go into your meeting and it will go much better. So his warm memory was he had always wanted to fly a airplane. And he had a picture. I'm not sure it was him, but it looked like it was. His son was sitting in the back seat, and he was flying the airplane. That gave him so much satisfaction and joy. And he said, the more you can bring elements of the weather and what you're wearing and how the day was and all this, just makes that memory so much stronger. But that was his ticket for having mental strength. And I've often told that story because one of my warm memory at the time was being in third grade and being a reader for the school play, Christmas play. And they didn't tell me how to be a good reader, you know? So I started paying attention, like, what makes them good? You know, I'd listen to the guy giving the news, and what's he doing that makes him good, you know, and what's a pastor or minister up in what is makes him good. So I realized that I needed to speak loud enough for people to hear me, slow enough so they could understand me, and that I look at my audience once in a while. And after having thought about that and that principle of mental strength, I thought a week or two later, I thought, why just have one more memory? And so I got out a piece of paper and wrote down about 8 or 10, 12 things. And the shock to me was half the list that was a warm memory was in front of people. What? Had I been in the wrong career? And that was probably the thing that went along with that, you know, being an influencer, that maybe I was meant to be in front of people. And I didn't know it until I realized that when I made that list. And that gave me courage to try some new behavior. And um, I'm still I'm still working on whether or not getting more of my emotions revealed. I'm still thinking there's some healing to do around that. And what was the other thing I'm working? Well, that I might have some block of around having grown up on the farm. Everything was tight, you know, with money, but I've been trying to, as I'm going to sleep, say, you know, that prayer for myself is to um, that I have a abundant harvest. And abundant harvest to me, I just wrote down yesterday, would be like in 10 years that there's 5 million boomers have been impacted and have found fulfillment and satisfaction from living from their spark. And so here's the first time for me to put it out there and say, in 2035, it's going to have harmony and heaven on earth because of the work that I've done.
It's so beautiful. I love your enthusiasm, your work, your passion for it. Did you always think that you would end up doing this work, or did it just kind of blossom?
Kind of blossomed, and how that is, even while I was in learning in the coaching classes, I became more aware of well, actually I've helped people over my career who were trying to get their resume, you know, beefed up and ready for something they wanted to apply for. And you know, I may notice something that's good about you that you're too close to your own skin to realize that you're unique, and I encourage you to add that to your resume because it would strengthen what you bring to a company. One of the trainings that I have yet to take that I'd love to take is around a collective potential. And the well, I don't know that it connects to Peace Corps, but when we used it, I chaired a convention for 1,800 people for Christian singles, and we often encouraged, you know, when you're elbow to elbow with people doing the same thing and you're together putting something on, you're growing personally, You're growing in the people that you're working with, and you're doing something productive together. It wouldn't happen unless you're doing it together. So to me, collective potential is one of those treasure boxes I think we're not yet opening up. The guy that leads it is John Berghoff, and he so much of the time, in fact, I felt this before I left Seattle for Tampa. I was tired of being talked at from the person, in the front of the room. I wanted to be a participant. And John Berghoff teaches you how to invite and welcome everybody's input and how much better your decisions are, and your company and your culture when everybody has a voice. It's waiting to happen, and I'd love to be a part of that too, because I love bringing out the best in people. Everybody's unique. Everybody is unique, and yet my golden nugget. One of the examples is showing on TV. I remember seeing a couple of years ago somebody in a wheelchair dancing with Tool in on a stage in her wheelchair. And I think there was a man on the stage that was helping her with some of her movements. But the beauty of letting somebody in her wheelchair express her nugget of gold just excites me, because, yes, let her participate and express her beauty to us. That's a new day.
I love that. The wedding dress. I was just curious as to when did you buy the wedding dress and how?
Well, explore the possibilities. I was had just read a book, um, about, it was Daily Guide to Miracles, I believe was the name of it, and it was meant to be a 90-day read the book and reread it, 3-4 times a year. I just read it once, but it was giving us ideas every day of how to, in fact, live life expecting your dream. And at that time, my dream was to get married. I haven't dated that much, but I, nonetheless had that desire in my heart. And I, in fact, had put off even praying for a husband for a number of years, because I thought, well, if it's not God's will for me, then why pray? And it just frustrate me. So gradually, uh, I decided that what I wanted in my heart, my dreams, is what God wanted. He wants us to be happy, and that's part of the Daily Guide to Miracles. So I had gathered a bunch of the wedding invitations that I'd gotten over the years, and how would I say it, describe the announcement, and what I started working on, what would I design, the wedding party and all that out of. And I was in the process of kind of deciding on what the maids, matrons wear, and the color. I love spring green, lime green, because it's new life. And so I had divulged my dream to my friend Barbara McCoy, and she kind of put a squash on it. She's quite fashion sensitive. And she said, "But Sharon, you don't know what season it's going to be in to choose a style or color or theme for a wedding." And so I quit, put my dream on hold. But I did go to our big box Bon Marché uh, store and order my dress, and I had to tell a couple lies. How'd you meet him? And at the time, I kind of had somebody, a crush on somebody. In fact, I drove his mom down to, was it Arizona? Probably. But that never, and he had never been married, and he has since married. But yeah, it was my expect a miracle plan. And while lived in Tampa, I did add some iridescent sequins to the dress, make it a little more sparkly, because Sunday afternoons I kind of had a tendency to want to snack too much. And this would help me with snacking. So yes, I still have the dress, and I'm not sure I would wear, well, I need to lose about another 20 pounds to get back into it because I had blossomed up to 245 pounds before I retired. So I've taken off a good amount, and I either would need to have the dress altered or remodeled, let's say. But yeah, I never regretted having done that dream. Let's put it that way.
Are you open to now? Do you have any prospects?
I don't have prospects, but there's that element that I'm realizing that may be a part of this is the more you love yourself, the more you can love others. And in fact, our sermon on Sunday seemed to be kind of about life is all about loving people, and I need to do a better job of that. I'm working on that. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
One thing that we always ask people, the name of our podcast is In the Black, and it's talking about how we can take our lives from being in the red or in the negative in financial terms to in the black, something where we have created positivity out of that. And so, in your own life and in your experience, what does being in the black mean to you?
Well, that would be definitely having to do with living from your heart. I I would like to be a speaker that goes around the country and inspires boomers. Now, I do a lot of inspiring, encouraging people. I do weekly a Queen of Courage short video on Instagram, but I get the feeling there not a lot of boomers are on social media. I so I need to go eyeball to eyeball to talk to them, and maybe it's in a senior plus 55 plus community, but I'm finding that young people are also wanting to know how do you do retirement. I was on a podcast with a 26-year-old in Nepal, another lady that was 28, and she was traveling around the world doing Instagram, well, everything social, but she was living life on her terms, and that is so possible these days. I think when we are aligned with what matters to us, and that our energy is focused on life being good. Oh, I started to tell you about my near death experience stories that I love to collect. And I have read so many of them that, and it's in my introduction to my book, is that I've imagined experiencing kind of what they describe in their story. And so I thought, well, they talk about so much beauty and fragrances and um, gold and water that glistens like crystals and so much um, beauty and life to the full that I imagine standing, with I wanted all that to permeate me, imagine experiencing that too. I've now met 3 or 4 people that have had that experience. And then I would ask myself, what does it do to make life here different? And living from my spark is what makes life different. And for it to feel like harmony and a little bit of heaven on earth, that is just the best. So I wouldn't call it black exactly, but the being on the positive side of living life as it was meant to be for the best of us. That's oh, in fact, one of my this comes from a book I read, and it certainly fits with heaven. I'm especially fond of you, and I feel like what God put in our soul and living from that is the ultimate. I'm especially fond of you because I put a destiny inside of you.
I love
Yes.
that. Is there anything else you would like to share?
Well, I did write a course on volunteering, and that is on the Great Discovery platform. And it's make a marvelous transition into volunteering. And I speak about it around, it's organized around one of the guests I had on my podcast. He was a AARP president for Washington State, and he came with 9 tips on what you get from volunteering. So I used his tips, added my tips, and trying to recruit more people using their free time in retirement volunteering. I had a couple of uncles that did a lot of that. And it helps you live longer. It helps you have a meaningful life. And I'm sure you go to bed either worn out and or contented.
Well, it was so good to have you on our podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of In the Black. I hope today's story left you feeling inspired and reminded of the incredible strength that lies in each of us. Our guest today has taken her toughest challenges and transformed them into something beautiful, reminding us all that even in the darkest moments, there's always a way to find light in the world.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe and share In the Black with another woman who could use a little encouragement. Together, we're building a community of passion, purpose, and power. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and remember, your story matters. Your choices change things, and being your most authentic self can and will change the world around you.